It was just feels like a couple of weeks ago that we talked about the Biden administration making the terrible decision to send cluster ammunitions to Ukraine. Now, the problem with that type of ammunition is that it doesn't target just a distinct location. Obviously, it spreads, so that can hurt civilians. Well, now there is new information that says that Joe Biden has approved depleted uranium rounds to Ukraine. Now, why is this problematic other than the fact that it's war? Apparently, with uranium rounds, you have the issue of contamination for people in that area. So again, when people say that they want to save the lives of the Ukrainian people, I want you to take this segment when we clip it, send it to your friends or your family members who believe that that is the case. They believe that narrative, and send this to them, because I want them to see if you really care about the lives of Ukrainian people, you wouldn't try to poison the people in the area. Let's go ahead and get to this first clip here. This is from One. I like One.
And the top focus in World DNA this morning is what is happening on the battlefield in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war. Well, US says that it will provide depleted uranium rounds to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Romania says that parts of Russian drone fell on its region. The question is, what exactly is happening? My colleague Haim breaks it down for you.
Thank you so much, Raisha. Right, as you mentioned, now the United States, it's saying that it will provide depleted uranium tank ammunition to Ukraine. Depleted uranium munitions are highly effective at piercing armor plate, but there is some controversy when it comes to this. The metal is toxic for the soldiers who use the weapons and for civilians in areas where they are fired.
So those weapons, again, they're not just toxic to the civilians, but also to the soldiers who are using those weapons. When they told you at the beginning of this war that they were willing to fight to the last Ukrainian, they really meant that. That means fighting until everyone is possibly dead. Just a reminder there.
While Romania stated that parts of possible Russian drone fell on its territory. Military experts opine that Ukraine's counteroffensive woes and continuing with recent gains, a far cry from lightning successes last year. Now, the United States on Wednesday announced a $175 million military assistance package for Ukraine. The package includes anti-tank missiles, artillery, mortar rounds. The package also includes small arms, ammunition, and clearing obstacles. Since Russia's invasion in February last year, Ukraine has become far and away the top recipient of U.S. foreign aid. Now, during a visit to Kyiv, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated that Washington would maximize efforts to support Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba told Blinken that Washington's support was not charity. He said, and I'm quoting here, "Today, thanks to our partners, Ukraine is restraining Russia's aggression." Now, the U.S. package also includes, as I mentioned earlier, depleted uranium ammunition.
I want you to pay attention to the way that they worded that. They said that Ukraine is restraining Russia's aggression. Again, they're just, boy, I tell you, let's be very clear here. Ukraine is obviously not winning. CNN had to acknowledge this recently. Also, if the United States is continuing to send them weapons packages, that right there lets you know that they're losing. Like, think about this, people, right? So we have to pay attention to this. Like, one can be pretty good sometimes. One is the channel. They can be pretty good sometimes. Al Jazeera good sometimes. But even with them, I find that I have to correct a couple of things.
President Vladimir Putin has warned that he would deploy depleted uranium ammunition if Ukraine received the arms. Here's more on the deadly ammunition. Now, the 120-millimeter rounds are for M1 Abrams tanks that are expected to be delivered to Ukraine before the end of the year. Depleted uranium munitions are controversial due to their association with health problems such as cancer and birth defects in areas where they were used in past conflicts.
We're going to pause here for a second because we want to talk about the health problems. We have seen this as an issue in other countries as well. We have seen this as an issue in Vietnam, where it affected not just civilians, but also soldiers. We've talked about this before. We've seen this in countries such as Afghanistan. We've seen it in different areas of Palestine. Like, war is not, it's very profitable, obviously, but obviously it does come with terrible, terrible ramifications for the people, even after the war has ended. So the weapons that they're trying to use, these can cause health problems such as cancer, birth defects. Like, how is anybody okay with this? And why are more people calling out the Biden administration for approving this type of weapon package to go through? Ukrainian Americans, those who are living in this country, you should be bothered by this. Because we're talking, it could be 5, 10 years, 15 years down the line when people will have to deal with these health issues. Because once it's there, it's in the air. They're literally not, obviously, trying to save the Ukrainian people. They are making their lives worse. And I don't know, if people have money to flee Ukraine, but if you had money to flee Ukraine, you might want to do that right now. This is crazy. This is insane. And more people need to call out the Biden administration for this, but a lot of people are not. A lot of people are silent. But Joe Biden's doing such a great job, people. Isn't that what everyone's saying? Vote for Joe Biden. He's doing such a great job. Let's continue. And I have another clip I'm going to show you too of an interview from Democracy Now! About the situation as well.
However, they've not been definitively proven to have caused such issues. Now, the density of depleted uranium, a byproduct of the nuclear enrichment process, helps rounds containing it to punch through heavy armor, making it ideal for use in ammunition designed to target tanks. The first casualty of the Ukrainian counteroffensive was wishful thinking. Any hope that Russian troops would abandon their trenches and flee, that has now been left far behind on the battlefield. And here's what experts are saying on Ukraine's counteroffensive woes. Speaking on the condition of anonymity, U.S. officials told the New York Times that Kyiv, it's been deploying too many troops in the wrong places.
This is a mess. Deploying too many troops in the wrong places. This is an absolute mess. How long is this conflict going to continue, you guys?
Ukraine's best combat units are being sent equally to the east and the south, when they should concentrate more in the south, where heavy fighting normally occurs. By not consolidating its power in the right areas, the war-torn nation is reportedly struggling to achieve its main goal, which is of cutting off Russian supply lines in southern Ukraine by damaging the bridge that was connecting Moscow and the Crimean Peninsula. Now, analysts say that Melitopol and Berdyansk in...
We'll pause here. I want to take you back to this text right here. Ukraine is struggling to achieve its main goal of cutting off Russian supply lines in the south. Again, she kind of flies past this, but I just wanted to pause there and say that's just another example to show you that they're not winning. Just another example.
Of cutting off Russian supply lines in southern Ukraine by damaging the bridge that was connecting Moscow and the Crimean Peninsula. Now, analysts say that Melitopol and Berdyansk in the south are far more strategically significant from fronts than Bakhmut in the east. Russia has increasingly tapped its Cold War arsenals, deploying tanks dating to the 1950s to replenish its early losses, and such old weapons can still perform very well. Russia has thousands of tanks. It's put many of them to use as stationary weapons in their defensive lines, including in the Zaporizhzhia region, where they have proved to be effective.
Russia has thousands of tanks. This is why this was a horrible idea. This whole idea, again, this is a NATO proxy war. This was a horrible idea. And by the way, I want to be very clear, especially for those of you that are part of my international audience. I personally, and I think many of you in the chat, I personally do not want any conflict with Russia. I do not want the U.S. to go to war with Russia. I don't want the U.S. to go to war with China. It's a big loser for us. We're talking about the possibility of World War III. And every weapon package that the US government sends to Ukraine, that increases escalation. How long do you guys think that Vladimir Putin's just going to sit back and say, yeah, we'll just drag this out? How long? Because all he has to do, because honestly, if this goes on too long for him, all he has to do is knock on China's door and say, hey, can you come help me out? Then what do we do? All of this is happening under, I want to remind you, this is happening under Biden's administration. Now, let's be clear. Donald Trump still sent weapons to Ukraine too. Let's not sit back and pretend like he didn't. He did. But look at where we are now. Such a mess, such a mess. We'll continue and then we'll go to the interview of the gentleman on Democracy Now!
Relying on agents and collaborators, Moscow has been successful in repeatedly hitting Ukrainian military depots. Russia has stopped using battalion-sized tactical groups it deployed early in the war, and it's shifted now to smaller units. While the Russian Air Force, it's operated in relatively small numbers, it has modernized its stocks of bombs to turn them into gliding weapons that have proven to be efficient. The 500-kilogram bombs, adapted with a GPS module, it can inflict massive damage. Russian engineers, they've shown prowess in building field fortifications and complex obstacles along the front line. The obstacles include concrete reinforced trenches and command bunkers, wire entanglements, ditches, anti-tank hedgehogs or dragon's teeth, and complex minefields as well.
Okay, let's go ahead and pause there. Now let's go to this clip from Democracy Now! Where they talked about these uranium rounds as well. Again, we're talking about the US government sending these types of weapons, which you could argue decades ago they didn't realize that these weapons caused health problems later on down the line as well. But they do know now. And they're still willing to send those weapons to other countries, to Ukraine. And they don't care if those people get sick. They don't care. What's the health insurance like in Ukraine? What are the healthcare services like? Because from what I heard, it's not good. So if you have multiple people developing types of cancer or birth defects, do they have the healthcare system strong enough to deal with those issues? These are things to think about. And then you'll hear about this in the history books 20 years from now, how the US government caused these issues in Ukraine. And we're trying to tell you about it now. What's up, Danny? Shout out to Danny Haifong. Great program again at Sabby Sabs. Thank you so much, Danny. You guys should check out Danny's channel if you're not. I think a lot of you do watch Danny, but Danny covers geopolitics. He's really good on this stuff. We're going to go to this video here from Democracy Now! Alarming Biden to supply depleted uranium shells to Ukraine despite contamination risks. They really do not care about these people.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We turn now to Ukraine, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Kyiv on an unannounced visit to Ukraine, expected to announce a new package worth more than $1 billion in U.S. aid for Ukraine. This comes as the Biden administration is reportedly planning to announce it will, for the first time, send depleted uranium munitions to Ukraine, even though the weapons are radioactive and their use causes contamination that's hazardous to human health. Reuters reports the armor-piercing uranium munitions are part of a new military aid package for Ukraine set to be unveiled in the next week. This follows a previous decision by the Biden administration to arm Ukraine with cluster munitions, which have been banned by an international treaty ratified by more than 110 countries. This week, a new report by the Cluster Munition Coalition found 916 deaths and injuries from cluster bombs in Ukraine last year. Meanwhile, it was reported Monday one of the 14 so-called Challenger 2 tanks that Britain sent to Ukraine with the capacity to fire depleted uranium shells was destroyed in a battle with Russian forces.
Let me show you the health effects. This is one of the things I wanted to show you. Actually, let me go to the first picture because there's one of, okay, health effects of uranium. Now, this is on average, an average person. the bones, your brain, your lungs, of course, that's a giveaway, the spleen, pancreas, digestive tract, reproductive system. That's where we're talking about the birth defects, your kidneys, and your liver. You see this? All right, now let's look at it for a pregnant woman. Now look at this. Same thing, brain, lungs, pancreas, digestive tract, reproductive system, kidneys, liver, spleen, your bones. Like guys, this is poison. This is poison to these people. Let's continue.
Forces in the village of Robotyne, which Ukraine says its troops recently captured in its counteroffensive. For more, we go to London. We're joined by Phil Miller, chief reporter for Declassified UK, an independent media outlet that focuses on national security. His story is headlined, "Contamination Fears After Ukraine Loses British Tank." Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us, Phil. Can you start off by responding, although you're in Britain, to the U.S., what looks like the Biden administration decision to send DU munitions to Ukraine, and tell us what you found in your expose with the British tank that was just destroyed?
Thank you for having me, Amy. So I think Biden's decision to send tanks with depleted uranium to Ukraine has been made possible in large part because Britain led the way on this. If you remember back in January, our Prime Minister here, Rishi Sunak, announced that Britain was going to send these 14 tanks. And that was at a time when it was controversial just to send tanks. And that helped cross the red line. And after that, we saw countries like Germany announcing that they would send much larger quantities of tanks to Ukraine. And this has really been Britain's role throughout this war, has been to kind of up the ante and to lead the way on weapons supplies to Ukraine, despite the kind of escalatory fears about what effect that's having on the battlefield.
I disagree with him a little bit here because the thing is, I think the U.S. government would have chosen to send those weapons regardless if the UK sent the tanks or not. Because let's go back to the Leopard tanks decision. Let's remember it was a couple of months ago when Germany announced that they were going to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Now, remember, the German people, the majority of the people in Germany were against that decision. But the Greens in Germany agreed with it because they felt that pressure from Joe Biden. So it was after Joe Biden announced that the U.S. would be sending those Leopard tanks. Then Germany said, okay, well, I guess we need to do this because they felt that amount of pressure because Germany is an ally with the United States. So I disagree with him here. I think this would have happened regardless if the UK did this or not. Just keeping it real.
So starting with anti-tank launchers back right before the invasion, to then tanks, to more recently even cruise missiles. This seems to be the role that Britain has played in the conflict, and it makes it easier for other countries like Germany or now the US to send much larger quantities of weapon systems that were once considered controversial. Now, the reason that depleted uranium is so controversial is because it's essentially a byproduct of nuclear waste, and it is radioactive. The UK stockpile even contains some trace amounts of plutonium. And much of this was made in the 80s and 90s, and the stuff that we've been sending out to Ukraine, some of it may even have expired. But it was used.
Did you guys hear that? That was the piece, another piece I wanted you to hear. Some of the things that they've sent out is already expired. Guys, this is a death wish. They are sending these people to their death. That's really what this is. This is insane. And I'll continue to talk about this because I really do believe, don't be surprised if a year from now, maybe next year, don't be surprised if they're still losing on the front lines, on the battlefield. Don't be surprised if next thing you know, there's the call to, well, we got to send in this many U.S. troops. And that'll affect American soldiers as well. These weapons that they're sending over there.
Most notably in the Gulf Wars in Iraq. And there's been a long concern there about birth defects and cancers linked to the use of this ammunition in Iraq and also in the former Yugoslavia. And so when I revealed back in March that Britain was actually sending this ammunition with its Challenger 2 tanks, there was international outcry. Farhan Haq, the UN Secretary General spokesman, came out and condemned the decision by the UK to supply these weapons. And Russian President Vladimir Putin, quite predictably, used it as a pretext to send so-called tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, which brought the Europe and the world one step closer to nuclear confrontation and the catastrophic consequences that would flow from that. So even before these weapons had been fired in Ukraine, it would already had an adverse implications for international peace. Now, the British Ministry of Defence says that there's a low risk to human health from using these weapons, and it says it's necessary because depleted uranium is an ultra-dense metal that's able to punch through tank armour in a way that other munitions aren't able to. So it's made as essentially a dart that's fired through enemy tanks. But this justification is slightly undermined by the fact that the UK military also likes to point out that Russia is increasingly having to use very antiquated tanks, including T-62s that were made in the 1960s, and even some armoured personnel carriers that were first fielded in 1954. So the UK military is kind of trying to have its cake and eat it with this argument, saying on the one hand, Ukraine needs very advanced anti-armour weapons, whilst at the same time highlighting that Russia is using very antiquated weapon systems. And even though some of the more recent Russian tanks...
You wouldn't have to worry about Russia using more advanced weapon systems if you would have just gone along with the negotiation in the very beginning. When they tried to negotiate, we wouldn't be in this situation. But again, you have to remember, there's no money in peace. There's profit and a lot of money when it comes to war. But we wouldn't even be in this situation. You wouldn't be hearing about Ukraine. And it's really funny to me because some Americans still don't even know where Ukraine is on the map. But they're all like, I was driving the other day. I was on my way home and I'm driving and I saw like these Ukraine flags like at the end of someone's driveway. And I'm just like, really? It's just interesting to me when these events happen. All of a sudden, everybody cares about this country where they don't even know where it's located. Some of them probably didn't even know that it existed. But we would not even be in this situation had they agreed to negotiate in the very beginning. We would not be here. But that's not what it's really about. This weapon package that has been sent to Ukraine, it shows you again, this is another example that you can show to your friends who continue to repeat that narrative that it's about saving the lives of Ukrainians. You can show this to your friends and show them if they really cared about the lives of Ukrainians, they wouldn't send weapons over there that are going to cause them to have cancer or birth defects. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't have sent cluster ammunitions, which could obviously affect civilians, right? Because it's not a specific target. Show that to your friends and your comrades who are repeating those talking points. So as I've said before, and I'll continue to say, it is not about the lives of the Ukrainian people, just like it wasn't about the lives of the women and the children in Afghanistan. It is about implementing some type of regime change against Vladimir Putin and removing him from power. And Ukraine, this was the US government's and NATO's perfect way to make that happen. That's ultimately what the end goal is. Whenever we hear about these wars, we have to ask ourselves, what is the end game? Mainstream media is going to tell you the end game is to save the women and the children. But you see the women and the children, dying on TV. You see the pictures from independent journalists, particularly of the contamination that's happened to people in places like Syria. So you see the women and the children are dying. So you know it's not about the women and the children. So then you have to go a step further and ask, what is the ultimate goal? And most of the time, the ultimate goal is either resources, extracting resources from those countries, or it is to implement some type of regime change. I'll let him finish and then we'll go to the comments here.
Tanks have been upgraded so that they are capable of firing depleted uranium. The UK military is not able to point to any evidence that Putin has actually allowed his troops to use this munition type yet in Ukraine. So this is very much something that the UK has introduced to the battle zone. And the tanks arrived in April in time for Ukraine's counteroffensive, and they've been held in reserve awaiting a breakthrough. And it seems that only in the last week or so has the counteroffensive advanced to the point where we've started to see videos of these British Challenger 2 tanks in action. And most surprisingly was the footage that emerged this week showing one of them billowing with smoke after being hit, presumably by Russian fire. And this is said to be the first time that a Challenger 2 tank has ever been destroyed in enemy action. Now, I'm told that the crew are said to have survived the strike, but there's a real risk that there was depleted uranium ammunition inside that could be ignited by the fire and producing a toxic aerosol that could cause a risk both to the tank crew and any other soldiers passing through the area. The video is filmed by what appear to be Ukrainian soldiers driving downwind in a car with open windows, so they would have certainly have inhaled these toxic fumes. And the UK military's own health assessments that I've seen from the 1980s, when this ammunition was invented, show that they were very concerned about the risk of a fire igniting this ammunition, and they said that you would need to send in teams with breathing apparatus to deal with it. People would need to stay upwind. Anyone who inhaled it should be taken to hospital, and you'd need a contamination team to move in there and deal with the large quantities of soil that would be contaminated. Now, of course, this area of Ukraine is a live war zone. They're not going to be able to undertake that kind of decontamination efforts for some time now. And it will be further complicated by the presence of other munitions, such as cluster bombs, which we know have a high failure rate, which can make it hard for these demining teams to go in. And what we've seen in other conflicts, notably in Iraq, is that these tank hulls litter the battlefield for many years after the conflict. Children go and play on them, thinking they're some kind of climbing frame, and they can become contaminated with depleted uranium, leading to very rare forms of cancer.
Rare forms of cancer. That's the other thing, too. Rare forms of cancer are harder to treat, right? I don't say cure because people don't really try to cure cancer. They try to treat it. But for me, it's so concerning because I've seen multiple videos of kids playing in places like in Yemen, which is also contaminated, parts of Syria, which is also people are breathing contaminated air. The United States government has honestly just, from as much as I can remember, has just basically become an imperialist international killing machine. Imagine if it happened to us. What is going to be left of this country when this is all over? Is Ukraine going to look like Yemen? Eric, if you can find, if you find me a picture of Yemen, I forgot to pull that, a picture of Yemen, what it looks like now. I want to show people the battlefield. In the meantime, Nick had some things to say about this. So Nick has been making these short videos on Hotspot along with Nico. These things are pretty cool. And it basically sums up a news story pretty quick. Listen to what Nick had to say about this as well. U.S. to arm Ukraine with toxic depleted uranium ammunition.
As Americans continue to struggle economically, the Biden administration decided to send Ukraine toxic, depleted uranium ammunition that's going to give Ukrainians cancer for generations to come. And this is right after the Biden administration approved a cluster bomb munitions not too long ago. But listen to me, you naive children. This is what protecting democracy looks like. I'm a very sophisticated news person. I'm here to tell you that in order to protect Ukraine, we must send them weapons that give their population cancer. Don't question me. A few other countries have depleted uranium ammunition. The United States is the only country that admitted to using them in conflict. That's why we know how dangerous depleted uranium ammunition is, because the United States used it in Iraq and the population is still suffering to this day. The crazy thing is the unhinged Biden administration still denies the dangers of using depleted uranium ammunition.
The CDC has stated that there is no evidence that the depleted uranium rounds cause cancer. The World Health Organization reports that there's been no increase of leukemia or other cancers and that have been established following.
These people will be the death of us, you guys. These people will be the death of us. These people are such liars.
That there's been no increase of leukemia or other cancers and that have been established following any exposure to uranium or DU.
Despite the fact that cancer rates tripled in Iraq after our use of it. In 2015, the Department of Defense even promised to stop using depleted uranium ammunition. Then we used it in Syria anyway. The United States government complained that Ukraine is too casualty averse. Now they are sending them weapons that will give their people cancer. You must be a fool to believe the United States care about the Ukrainian people.
Well said, Nick. Well said. That's why I want more people to hear about this so they can stop using that narrative, because the reality is a lot of people, they don't know about this. Eric, I'm gonna go to the comments. Let me know if you find a picture of Yemen. General of Leafy Army. Thank you, Sabby. That's absolutely correct. They should be concerned for their country. Call them out. I'm just saying, just keeping it real, you know. This is what they're doing to people in your country. Thank you for the super chat, Michael. Saw you're viral on TikTok. Your message is growing. I haven't even been on TikTok in about, I think a couple of weeks. So if I did go viral, thanks. I'm not good on TikTok. I'm not a good TikToker. I really am not. I throw things up there. I try. JB goes, so now the U.S. will use biological warfare, costing the lives of Ukrainians and Russians for generations. How many people will still suffer from the effects of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? That's another example. Danny says the UK has also docked a warship in Nigeria's port, likely in preparation for intervention against Niger. See, it's happening all across, you guys. No, not a map, Eric, just a picture of a picture of the country. Yeah, like if you search war-torn Yemen, it should pop up. Delthea says war is how Americans learn geography, right? Isn't that crazy? It is crazy. I have to go to TikTok and see what went viral. I'm going to go ahead and take this from Roger Meadows. Thank you so much, Roger. And I have to make myself smaller, but I don't know what I did here. Oh, nope. Is this going to make me smaller? See, this is why I let Eric do this, because I'm terrible at this. Thank you. Thank you so much for the tip, Roger. Last I checked, Ukraine blowing through more artillery faster than the US MIC can keep up with. Speaking of Danny, I think the only reason why we didn't go to war with China yet is because of low enlistment. Ooh, gotta get numbers up. They don't have enough kids from poor, and working class families to go. It's not just the kids are smart, but years of no health care and processed foods made kids unfit for enlistment. This is very true. That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Roger. It is not just because, you know, a lot of kids are smart and they've kind of woken up and they're like, yeah, I don't want to be a part of the military industrial complex. It's also because they don't meet the military requirements, because with the military, I think they still do body taping. My dad was in the military, and I've had friends that were in the military. They actually do body taping. They don't just measure like your weight. So it's weird. Like, you could meet the weight requirement, but if you don't meet the requirement for body taping, then you're out, right? If you're a female and you have large twins, you may not meet the body taping. In fact, a friend of mine, she tried to join the Air Force. This was years ago. And she didn't meet the body taping requirement because she had big tatas. But Yemen, I want to show you, this is what I'm saying. Is Ukraine going to look like war-torn Yemen? Look at this. You see this? Like, Yemen looks like someone just dropped off a bomb and pieced out. Look at this. This guy's just sitting here in rubble, right? Like, this was someone's home. The kids, see, the thing is, the people still live there. So it's not like they can just get away from it. So the kids do play around in this area. So they're breathing in those chemicals as well. Just more pictures here. Like, could you imagine, like, this is your backyard? This is your neighborhood. This is how people are living with this. This is very terrible. And who's going to come and rebuild this, right? Do they have money to rebuild this? Probably not, right? This is what the US government does to those countries. Terrible when you think about it.